Hi, everyone. This is Jo Massaro, and I am the founder of In Their Hands, which you are watching every day throughout the month of October. And I'm so excited that you are with us. I've decided to do something a little special, and I am going to do some reading, and it will probably go into the month of November, because all of the videos that you will watch in the month of October and all the handouts and all the fun will still be available until the end of November. So I'm real excited about that. But I don't know if you know of a gentleman by the name of C.S. Lewis. Do you know about him? Excuse me, I'm just going to adjust something that I forgot to do. C.S. Lewis was a gentleman who lived a long time ago. He was born, I think, in the late 1800s, and he died in 1963, I think. He wrote, you might know, the Chronicles of Narnia. Oops, let me just do that. Well, did you know that it is a 7-series book? Sorry, I have the lighting that is affecting what you see. So it is a 7-series book. Look at that. And the very first one, I thought, was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it's not. It is actually the Chronicles of Narnia, the Magician's Nephew, and that's what I'm going to be reading to you. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about C.S. Lewis because he's really a pretty fascinating guy. He was born in Belfast, Ireland. That's far away from where we live, in 1898. And his father, Albert James Lewis, he was a solicitor. Now, do you know what that means? I know that I do because I used to work for a lawyer and I was a paralegal for many years. So a solicitor is what they call a lawyer in other countries. And so that is who his dad was, and his mom was Florence, and she was such a nice lady. And he had an older brother named Warren. And years later on, you're going to find that he was called Warnie. And that's what his brother C.S. Lewis actually called him for his whole life. But do you know what C.S. stands for? Now, again, his name is C.S. Lewis. Now, I didn't even know that years ago when I started to look at these books. It's Clive Staples Lewis. Isn't that an interesting name? I know this, that I can imagine that when his mom probably called his name, she might have used the whole name, and that's a pretty big mouthful. Now, he had a dog named Jaxie, and this is kind of sad. But when he was 4 years old, the dog was hit by a car. And from that day on, he only allowed people to call him Jaxie. He wouldn't answer to Clive. He wouldn't answer to any of those names at all. He was Jaxie. And it stayed with him. And when he got older, his family and friends called him Jack. So we know him as C.S. Lewis, but he has all these different names. It's pretty fascinating. And so we're going to start this book tonight, and he dedicates it to a family. And it is to the Kilmer family. And I'm always fascinated. I'm like, well, who's the Kilmer family? Because I don't know who they are. Do you know who they are? Well, they're actually a family that lived at the time when he was writing. And in those days, by the way, I should tell you this, that there were no, where's my cell phone? There were no cell phones. There were no computers. There were no, all the digital stuff that we have today, no games, nothing like that. You were playing checkers or something like that, or chess. And so he wrote lots of letters. And so people kept letters in those days. He kept all of the letters that he got. He got a lot of letters, and he answered every single one. So can you imagine doing things that way? We're so used to, I'm texting quickly. I'm, doing all these things so fast. And little did we know, years ago, boys and girls, they didn't have those things. So it was very, very different. So I'm looking for here they are. I am looking for these because I need these to read. So anyway, so isn't this cool? These books, I just love this because when I was growing up, these are the kind of books that I read. these little books like this. And they don't have a lot of pictures at all. But you know how lucky you are that you were able to hear all the stories that you are this month, and to see all the beautiful pictures that are in there, the authors who wrote the books and the illustrators who drew all the pictures. I mean, they're absolutely gorgeous. But in my day, this is the kind of books that I had. So we're going to begin C.S. Lewis's The Magician's Nephew. And again, it's to the Kilmer family. And this is chapter 1. So bear with me if I might mispronounce a name or two. So hang in there with me. You may know it already. So if you do, that's great. So chapter 1 is The Wrong Door. This is a story about something that happened long ago when your grandfather was a child. That's a long time ago. It is a very important story because it shows how all the comings and goings between our world and the land of Narnia first began. See, there we go, Narnia. In those days, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, now I know who he is, was still living in Baker Street, and the Bastables were looking for treasure in the Lewisham Road. In those days, if you were a boy, you had to wear a stiff, they called it a stiff Eton collar, these really high things that were really strong and sturdy and very stiff. They were starched. Can you imagine having to wear those all the time? Every day they had to wear those, and schools were usually nastier than now. Wow, can you imagine? But meals were nicer. And as far as sweets, I won't tell you how cheap and good they were, because it would only make your mouth water in vain. I like sweets, how about you? And in those days, there lived in London a girl called Polly Plummer. She lived in one of the long row of houses which were all joined together. One morning, she was out in the back garden when a boy scrambled up from the garden next door and put his face over the wall. Polly was very surprised because up till now, there had never been any children in that house, but only Mr. Ketterley and Miss Ketterley, a brother and sister. He was an old bachelor and she was an old maid living together. So she looked up full of curiosity. The face of the strange boy was very grubby. It could hardly have been grubbier if he had first rubbed his hands in the earth and then had a good cry and then dried his face with his hands. As a matter of fact, this was very nearly what he had been doing. "Hello," said Polly. "Hello," said the boy. "What's your name?" "Polly," said Polly. "What's yours?" "Diggory," said the boy. Well, that's a name, isn't it? Diggory. "I say, what if," see, Polly thinks it's funny too. "I say, what a funny name," said Polly. "It isn't half so funny as Polly," said Diggory. "Yes, it is," said Polly. "No, it isn't," said Diggory. Well, they're not getting off to a good start, are they? "At any rate, I do wash my face," said Polly, "which is what you need to do, especially after," and then she stopped. She had been going to say, "after you've been blubbering," but she thought that wouldn't be very polite. "All right, I have then," said Diggory in a much louder voice, like a boy who was so miserable that he didn't care who knew he was crying. "And so would you," he went on, "if you lived all your life in the country and had a pony and a river at the bottom of the garden, and then been brought to live in a beastly hole like this." "London isn't a hole," said Polly, indignant. But the boy was too wound up to take any notice of her, and he went on. "And if your father was away in India, you had to come and live with an aunt and an uncle who's mad. Who would like that? And if the reason was that they were looking after your mother, and if your mother was ill and was going to die." Then his face went the wrong sort of shape, as it does if you're trying to keep back your tears. That's pretty sad, isn't it? "I didn't know. I'm sorry," said Polly humbly. And then, because she hardly knew what to say, and also to turn Diggory mindful to cheerful subjects, she asked, "Is Mr. Ketterley really mad?" Well, either he's mad, said Diggory, or there's some other mystery. Uh-oh, mystery. I like mysteries. How about you? He has a study on the top floor, and Aunt Letty says I must never go up there. Now, when I was a kid, if my parents said never to go up there, I probably would have gone up there. How about you? Hopefully we're listening to our parents, right? Well, that looks fishy to begin with. And then there's another thing. Whenever he tries to say anything to me at mealtimes, he never even tries to talk to her. She always shuts him up. She says, don't worry the boy, Andrew, or I'm sure Diggory doesn't want to hear about that. Or else, now Diggory, wouldn't you like to go out and play in the garden? What sort of things does he try to say? I don't know. He never gets far enough. But there's more than that. Oh, I'm going to turn the page in a minute, but this is the kind of pictures that I saw as a kid growing up. There's Polly and, oops, sorry, I got to move it so that you can see it. There's Polly and Diggory. One night, it was last night, in fact, as I was going past the foot of the attic stairs on my way to bed, and I don't much care for going past them either, I'm sure I heard a yell. Perhaps he keeps a mad wife shut up there. Yes, I thought of that. Or perhaps he's a coiner. Or he might have been a pirate, like the man at the beginning of Treasure Island. Oh, that was a good book, wasn't it? And be always hiding from his old shipmates. How exciting, said Polly. I never knew your house was so interesting. You may think it's interesting, said Diggory, but you wouldn't like it if you had to sleep there. How would you like to lie awake listening for Uncle Andrew's steps to come creeping along the passage to your room? And he has such awful eyes. That was how Polly and Diggory got to know one another. And as it was just the beginning of the summer holiday, and neither of them were going to the sea that year, they met nearly every day. Their adventures began chiefly because it was one of the wettest and coldest summers there had been in years. That drove them to be indoors all the time, you might say, indoor exploration. What fun exploration is. I got to learn to say the word first, huh? It is wonderful how much exploring you can do with a stump of a candle in a big house or in a row of houses. Polly had discovered long ago that if you open a certain little door in the box room attic of her house, you would find the cistern and a dark place behind it, which you could get into by very carefully climbing in. The dark places were like a long tunnel with brick walls on one side and sloping roof on the other. In the roof, there were little chunks of light between the slates. There was no floor in this tunnel. You had to step from rafter to rafter, and between them, there was only plaster. If you stepped on the plaster, you'd fall through the ceiling and enter the room below. Polly had used the bit of the tunnel just beside the cistern as a smuggler's cave. She had brought up bits of old packing cases and seats of broken kitchen chairs and things of all sorts and spread them across the rafters so as to make a bit of a floor. Here she kept a cash box containing various treasures. Who has a box with treasures in it? I always did as a kid. Actually, I think I still have a box with treasures in it. And a story she was writing, and usually a few apples. She had often drunk a quiet bottle of ginger beer in there. Oh, ginger beer, not the kind, not the adult beer. Ginger beer is not the type of beer you could drink ginger beer. Not the type of beer that I'm talking about is an adult beer, but this is ginger beer. You could do that. The old bottles made it look more like a smuggler's cave. Wow. Diggory quite liked the cave. She wouldn't let him see the story, but he was more interested in exploring. Look here, he said. How long does this tunnel go on for? I mean, does it stop where your house ends? No, said Polly. The walls don't go out to the roof. It goes on. I don't know how far. Now look here's a picture of Polly. Let me just move my something on my computer. And I'm going to just expand my screen here a little bit. You see that? That's what she's made upstairs. That's pretty cool, huh? Then we could get the length of the whole row of houses. So we could, said Polly. And oh, I say, what? We could get into the other houses. Uh-oh, that sounds like trouble already. Yes, and get taken up for burglars. No thanks. Don't be so jolly clever. I was thinking of the house beyond yours. What about it? Why, it's the empty one. Daddy says it's always been empty since we came here. I suppose we ought to have a look at it then, said Diggory. He was a good deal more excited than you've had thought from the way he spoke. For of course he was thinking, just as you would have, all of the reasons why the house might not have been empty for so long. So was Polly. Neither of them said the word haunted. Ooh. Do you think it might be haunted? And both felt that once the thing had been suggested, it would be feeble not to do it. Shall we go and try it now, said Diggory. All right, said Polly. Don't if you'd rather not, said Diggory. I'm game if you are, she said. How are we to know we're in the next house? But one? They decided they would have to go out into the box room and walk across it, taking steps as long as the steps from one rafter to the other. See, they're pretty smart here. They would give them an idea of how many rafters went into a room. Then they would allow about 4 more for the passage between the 2 attics in Polly's house. And then the same number for the maid's bedroom as for the box room. Wow, they're pretty smart. I don't know that I would have thought about that at their age. That would give them the length of the house. When they had done that, distanced twice, they could end up at the end of Diggory's house. Any door they came to after that would let them into an attic of the empty house. But I don't expect it's really empty at all, said Diggory. What do you expect? I expect someone lives there in secret, only coming in and out at night with a dark lantern. We shall probably discover a gang of desperate criminals and get a reward. It's all rot to say a house should be empty all those years unless there was some mystery. Daddy thought it must be the drains, said Polly. Puh. Grown-ups are always thinking of uninteresting explanations, said Diggory. Now that they were talking by daylight in the attic instead of by candlelight in the smuggler's cave, it seemed much less likely that the empty house would be haunted. When they had measured the attic, they had to get a pencil and do a sum. You know what a sum is? You're going to find out. They both got different answers to it at first, and even when they agreed, I'm not sure they got it right. They were in a hurry to start on the exploration, so they were adding. We mustn't make a sound, said Polly as she climbed in against the cistern, because it's such an important occasion they took a candle each. Polly had a good store of them in her cave. It was very dark and dusty and draughty, and they stepped from rafter to rafter without a word except when they whispered to one another, we're opposite your attic now. Or, this must be halfway through our house. And neither of them stumbled, and the candles didn't go out, and at last they came where they could see a little door in the brick wall on their right. There was no bolt or handle on this side of it, of course, for the door had been made for getting in, not for getting out. But there was a catch, as there often is on the inside of a cupboard door, which they felt sure they would be able to turn. Shall I? Said Diggory. I'm game if you are, said Polly. Just as she had said before, both felt that it was becoming very serious, but neither could draw back now. Diggory pushed round the catch with some difficulty. The door swung open and the sudden daylight made them blink. Then there was a great shock. They saw that they were looking not into a deserted attic, but into a furnished room. But it seemed empty enough. It was dead silent. Polly's curiosity got the better of her. She blew out her candle and stepped out into the strange room, making no more noise than a mouse. It was shaped, of course, like an attic, but furnished as a sitting room. Every bit of the walls were lined with shelves, and every bit of the shelves was full of books. Oh my kind of place. I would love a big library in my home with all kinds of bookshelves and all kinds of books. A fire was burning in the grate. You remember that it was very cold, wet summer that year. And in front of the fireplace, with its back towards them, was a high-backed armchair. Between the chair and Polly, and filling most of the middle of the room, was a big table piled with all sorts of things. Printed books and books of all sorts you write in, and ink bottles and pens and sealing wax and a microscope. But what she noticed first was a bright red wooden tray with a number of rings on it. Oh my. They were in pairs, a yellow one and a green one together, then a little space, and then another yellow one and another green one. They were no bigger than ordinary rings, and no one could help noticing them because they were so bright. They were the most beautiful, shiny little things he can imagine. If Polly had been a very little younger, she would have wanted to put one in her mouth. Ooh, remember that when you were small? Or if you have little brothers and sisters, they like to put things in their mouths, right? The room was so quiet that you noticed the ticking of the clock at once. And yet, as she now found, it was not absolutely quiet either. There was a very, very faint humming sound. If hoovers had been invented in those days, Polly would have thought it was the sound of a hoover being worked a long way off, several rooms away and several floors down. You know what a hoover is? A vacuum. That's what they're talking about. That sound that you hear. But it was a nicer sound than that, a more musical tone, only so faint that you could hardly hear it. And look at, here's them when they open up the door. Pretty cool, huh? It's all right, there's no one here, said Polly over her shoulder to Diggory. She was speaking above a whisper now, and Diggory came out blinking and looking extremely dirty, as indeed Polly was too. This is no good, he said. It's not an empty house at all. We better bunk before someone comes. What do you think those are? Said Polly, pointing out the colored rings. Oh, come on, said Diggory. The sooner. He never finished what he was going to say, for at that moment something happened. The high-backed chair in front of the fire moved suddenly, and there rose up out of it in front of the fire, like a pantomime demon coming up out of the trapdoor, the alarming form of Uncle Andrew. They were not in the empty house at all. They were in Diggory's house and in the forbidden study. Oh boy, I think they're in trouble. Both children said, "Oh," and realized their terrible mistake. They felt they ought to have known all along that they hadn't gone nearly far enough. Uncle Andrew was tall and very thin. He had a long, clean-shaven face with a sharp, pointed nose and extremely bright eyes and a great tousled mop of gray hair. That's me, mop of gray hair. Diggory was quite speechless, for Uncle Andrew looked 1,000 times more alarming than he had looked before. Polly was not so frightened yet, but she soon was. For the first thing Uncle Andrew did was to walk across the door of the room, and shut it and turn the key in the lock. Oh my gosh. Then he turned around, fixed the children with his bright eyes, and smiled, showing all of his teeth. There, he said, now my fool of a sister can't get in at all. It was dreadfully unlike anything a grown-up would expect it to be doing. Polly's heart came into her mouth, and she and Diggory started backing towards the little door they had come up by. Uncle Andrew was too quick for them. He got behind them and shut the door too and stood in front of them. Then he rubbed his hands and made his knuckles crack. Ooh, did you ever do that? Okay, so rubbing your hands, I can't do it. Don't do it. It's not good for your knuckles. I am so delighted to see you, he said. 2 children are just what I wanted. Please, Mr. Kettery, said Polly. It's nearly my dinner time and I've got to go home. Well, will you let us out, please? Not just yet, said Uncle Andrew. This is too good an opportunity to miss. I wanted 2 children. You see, I'm in the middle of a great experiment. I tried it on a guinea pig and it seemed to work. Uh-oh, but then a guinea pig can't tell you anything, and you can't explain it how it came to come back. That didn't make any sense. I think I read it wrong. And you can't explain to it how to come back. Look here, Uncle Andrew, said Diggory. It really is dinner time, and they're looking for us in a moment. You must let us out. Must, said Uncle Andrew. Woo. I don't think he liked that. Diggory and Polly glanced at one another. They dared not say anything, but the glances meant, isn't this dreadful? We must humor him. If you let us go out for dinner now, said Polly, we'll come back after dinner. Ah, but how do I know that you would, said Uncle Andrew with a cunning smile. Then he seemed to change his mind. Well, well, he said, if you really must go, I suppose you must. I can't expect 2 youngsters like you to find it much fun to talk to an old buffer like me. He sighed and went out. You've no idea how lonely I sometimes am, but no matter, go to have your dinner. But I must give you a present before you go. It's not every day that I see a little girl in my dingy old study, especially, if I may say so, such a very attractive young lady as yourself. Polly began to think he might not really be mad after all. He was complimenting her. She loved it. Wouldn't you like a ring, my dear, said Uncle Andrew to Polly. Do you mean one of those yellow or green ones, said Polly. How lovely. Not a green one, said Uncle Andrew. I'm afraid I can't give the green ones away, but I'd be delighted to give you one of the yellow ones with my love. Come and try it on. Polly had now quite got over her fright and felt sure that the old gentleman was not mad. Time will tell. And there was certainly something strangely attractive about those bright rings. She moved over to the tray. Why, I declared, she said, that humming noise gets louder here. It's almost as if the rings were making it. What a funny fancy, my dear, said Uncle Andrew with a laugh. He sounded a very natural laugh, but Diggory had seen an eager, almost a greedy look on his face. Polly, don't be a fool, he shouted. Don't touch them. It was too late. Exactly as he spoke, Polly's hand went out to touch one of the rings, and immediately, without a flash or a noise or a warning of any sort, there was no Polly. Diggory and his uncle were alone in the room. And guess what? That's the end of chapter 1, and that's where we're going to end off. I can't wait to find out what happens. So I'll just be doing these. Let me just see how many chapters there are. There are 15 chapters. So I'll be doing these in 15 different videos, so you will have an opportunity to hear the story. I hope you enjoy it. I will definitely, like I said, these will definitely go into November, so it'll give you a chance to read the book. But I'm absolutely loving this. Now I'm like, what happened to her? You have to find out, right? So, and if you know, don't tell anybody, okay? Don't share it on the Facebook page because we don't want anybody to know yet. And I don't even know because I've never read it. So anyway, thank you guys. Have a great day. And what does it say up there? Who loves to read? I love to read. I hope you do too. Good night.